So Jesus is telling this story about this fig tree. And it's not bearing any fruit. It's fruitless. But he also mentions that besides being fruitless, it's exhausting the soil. So even though it's not producing anything, it's taking, and not giving anything back. And when you meet a person like that, it's hard to be around them. People that are always taking, but they're never giving. And that's kind of what he's talking about here, that there's no good fruit being produced, and therefore it has to be cut down. But of course, the analogy is with people, not fruit trees. So we have to be careful that, we are having that moment of turning back to God. Next Sunday is the prodigal son story, a continuation of repentance. We have to be a people that are repenting. And, sometimes things happen to us that seem very bad, but they're the wake-up call that get us back to God. This happens. I remember years ago, I had a good friend who was a wonderful priest, and he had a gift. He had a real charism for preaching. And one day a lady, mom came up to him and said, "Will you please talk to my son? He's a teenager. He won't go to Mass." "Well, why would he listen to me? I'm a stranger," if he's not going to listen to his own mother. So she insisted, and of course, he gave in and went to see this young man of about 17 years of age. And the kid didn't want to see him, stubborn teenager. So he just looks at the kid and he goes, "I'm praying that God hits you in the head with a 2x4. And the kid goes, "What is that supposed to mean?" He goes, "You'll know it when it happens." And he walks away. That was it. 2 lines, gone. Week later, he gets into a terrible car wreck. He's in the hospital. He's going to be fine, but he's in traction, and he's in a lot of pain. And the priest went back to see him. And he said, "So you got your 2x4 to the head, did you?" And the kid says, "Yeah, I guess I did. And I'm rethinking everything. And I really was living a very bad life, and I caused my parents a lot of heartache, and I'm sorry for that. Can I go to confession?" He did his confession. He came back to God. So the thing that was so terrible was actually a good thing. Now, I'm going to tell you a story now, a true story about a priest, also another priest, that was part of my religious community. And he was ordained in 1973. His name is Father Stephen Shire. He was much more concerned with what people thought of him than what God thought of him. And so he was trying to impress the people. He was trying to look holy, but he wasn't actually doing the work. He wanted to win people's admiration. This is his own story, by the way. I'm not shaming him. So he knew he was not being a good priest. He was shirking his duties. But he said that he would have guessed everybody thought he was a good priest. And then one day in October of '85, he was driving back to his parish about 80 miles on the highway, got into a terrible head-on collision with a pickup truck, and also a collision with God. Nobody was killed, but he was horribly, horribly wounded. And in the accident, part of his head was sheared off completely. He was left unconscious. He also had a broken neck, the C2 vertebrae, which is the hangman's fracture, and he had about a 10% chance to live. They life watched him by helicopter to Wichita, where they took a better evaluation of his situation. And as it turns out, there wasn't a lot they could do for him. He had no surgery whatsoever. And the accident happened in October. On December 2nd, he checked out of the hospital, still with this apparatus holding his neck in place, but he went home. And then in May of that following year, 7 months later, he returned to ministry. A miracle, literally a miracle. So one day he's celebrating Mass. This is where it all kind of comes together. And the gospel was today's gospel about the fig tree not bearing fruit. And as he's proclaiming the gospel, the page becomes illuminated and enlarged, and the words of the lectionary come up and come at Father Shire in a supernatural way, and he's completely dumbfounded by what's happening, and he kind of pulls himself together to finish celebrating the Mass and then runs home to his rectory. And when he gets in the rectory, he sort of has this mystical experience where he goes back to the moment of the accident and he can see his particular judgment happening between him and Jesus in very clear, like he's watching a movie. And Jesus took him through his entire life and showed him how miserably he failed, not just in being a child of God, but also a failure as a priest. All he could say was, "Yes, Lord." That's all he could say. He had planned that before the accident, he had already planned that he would have excuses to tell Jesus about why he wasn't doing what he should be doing. He actually thought it through, oddly, and his plan was, I'm going to have excuses. But now in the presence of the Lord, he realizes there's no excuse. You just watch your life and say, "Yes, Lord." That's all you can do in the presence of divine truth. He used to go to confession regularly before the accident, but he never made a firm purpose of amendment to change. He was going through the motions, and he wasn't really, he had no desire to change his life at all. And that's a problem because you have to have that desire. He didn't have it, and he knew that his confessions were weak and oftentimes worthless. He was not allowing the sacrament to change his life. And so, before the accident, he also thought there would be time to convert. I'll get that later in life. I'll convert and give myself back to God. But now he realizes that time is over, and there's no more time. Time is up. He was taking, but not giving back any good fruit, like the fig tree. At the end of his judgment, he is sentenced to hell. And all he could say was, "Yes, Lord." And at that moment, he heard a woman. And the woman said, "Son, will you please spare his life and his eternal soul?" Jesus replied, "Mother, he's been a priest for 12 years for himself and not for me. Let him reap the punishment he deserves." Our Lady responded, "But son, if we give him special graces and strength, let's see if he bears fruit. If not, your will be done." There was a short pause, after which Jesus said, "Mother, he's yours." Okay, so he's already alive. He realizes that he's been given a second chance. And ever since that moment, he has given his life over completely to Our Lady. Before this, he had no special relationship with her. But after it, she's everything to him, because without her intercession, he'd still be in hell. There would be no second chance. And he says at the foot of the cross, Jesus gives his mother to be the mother of the church, the mother of humanity. His mother, your mother, my mother. And he says, or said every moment he could after that, "Isn't that somebody you want on your side? A heavenly mother who's also the mother of God. Isn't that somebody you want on your side?" He said that he believed that the angels and saints were make-believe friends before the accident. After the accident, he realized they're very much real, more real than we are. He also said we have a home, and it's not this life, it's the next. He also said our priorities are mixed up. His priorities were mixed up. The priority should have been on saving his soul, on loving God with all his heart and soul and strength, and on taking care of his parishioners' souls. That should have been his priority. He also said that if he had died, his parishioners would have surely thought he was in heaven. Probably would have never even prayed for him, thinking he's in heaven. Not that would have mattered, he would be in hell. He also said, the only one we have to please is God. Jesus does not take a poll of your parishioners or your friends to find out should you go to heaven. It's just him. And in this case, Mary was there as well. So Jesus is the only one that matters when it comes to what others think about us, because Jesus is the only one who will stand there and judge us. Now, if any of you are thinking, well, I'm going to start praying for Mary to be at my judgment, to put in a good word for me, that's not the point of this homily at all. Like, we can't all have car wrecks that take off part of our brain and then we have this moment where we're sent back to earth. Let this be the moment. Let this be the car wreck. This day, let this be the reckoning that you need to give everything over to Jesus. If you haven't been to confession in the last 6 months, go to confession. Pick up an examination of conscience in the back there in the narthex, or go online and look up Bulldog Catholic Examination. It's the best examination out there. And then go to confession. But then don't just go through the motions. Actually put a plan in action to change your life. We do this for everything else, right? We do this for work. We do this for home. I've been to many of your homes that have 5, 6, 7, 8 children, and you have big boards on the refrigerator of all the little activities that have to happen through the day to get the day over with. So I know you know how to do it. Now you can do it for your soul. This is what I must do today. And it's not just the doing, it's the loving, right? It all boils down to love. Augustine said, love God and do whatever. And he wasn't just saying, like, take license to just sin your little face off. No, if we really love God, we're always going to do what's best. That's kind of the point. He also said that he always ran from the cross. That's a problem. You know, you can't run from the cross. That's a very bad thing to do. God gives us crosses to purify us and to bring grace into the world. So please, when you have crosses, you offer them to Jesus to convert souls. Somebody once told me they had an image while in adoration, and they were given the crosses they were given through their life. At the end of life, they saw made a bridge that took them to heaven. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, I don't think it's literally the way it works, but it kind of as a metaphor, it really kind of is a beautiful one. His mission after his accident, or after this revelation from this gospel reading, was to let everybody know that Jesus' love is real. But so is his justice, and so is hell. We get to choose, so choose wisely. Let me conclude with some of the words from today's parable that were so meaningful to Father Shire. Look here, for 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit of this fig tree and finding none. Cut it down. Why should you be taking up ground and exhausting the soil? Sir, the man replied, leave it 1 more year and give me time to dig around it and fertilize it. It may bear fruit next year. If not, then you can cut it down. Father Shire went to his eternal reward on April 16th of 2020 after he lived out the rest of his life in love of God and service to his parishioners.